Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. And I'm blessed. This is the second time I've gotten to speak with him on my podcast. Is John Zmirak, and you all know him from thestream.org, correct?
Correct. I'm sorry. I'm not seeing the screen where, okay, hold on. Yes, stream.org. I'm a senior editor there and I write 5 days a week and I'm working on a book as well.
You do. You're prolific. It's fun, John, to do research, on you because there's a lot there. So.
My poor anybody else, there are like 6 other people with the name Zmirak in North America, all first cousins. Don't know any of them. Those poor guys, if you Google their last name, it's like 47 pages of political controversy that I've written, and then you get to them.
So let's see. I gotta tell people this that I have to say that I have enjoyed your conversations with Eric Metaxas a lot. So on his show, yeah, you appeared there fairly regularly.
Once a week, pretty much.
Yeah, and I have to say, 2019 was a rough year for me. I had two really close friends that died very unexpectedly.
Oh, sorry.
2020, of course, was a rough year for everybody. And our lockdown here in California and San Francisco was in March, and it was pretty hard.
Yeah.
And then you and Eric have kept those podcasts up. I think you were in Texas and he was in
New York.
Yeah, and I have to say they helped me a lot. The humor, and because I think you're a funny guy, and Eric looks like a serious. Well, he's a serious man. I'm sure he's serious.
He's also a complete goofball. His dream is to have a conservative Christian influence, but basically mainstream version of the Carol Burnett show. His ideal is the Carol Burnett show. That is his. We all have moments in history that for us were the high point. I think for Eric, it was the early 70s Carol Burnett show.
Wow. So he has a distinct sense of humor. But
Yeah.
I have to say when he posted another episode with you on it, gosh, to wait for that, it meant a lot for me. I know it doesn't.
Oh, wow. I'd like to think I help. Maybe I'm doing for you what World's Dumbest Thrill Seekers does for me. Allows you to turn off your brain and watch the goofiness happen every day. I end the day watching one of those World's Dumbest Shows or Impractical Jokers. I have a new one, the show Hot Ones, in which people have to answer difficult trivia questions while eating increasingly spicy hot wings and not throwing up. Ooh. That helps me get out of the day.
Yeah, and the topics that you and Eric were talking about, I mean, during that time, and still do, were serious topics, but it's nice that you can find a bit of humor in that. So.
Yeah, that's kept me sane over the decades, If I sometimes hate to quip, if you can't laugh at cancer, what can you laugh at? But I mean, when people I know, my parents both died of cancer, and I was around for all of it, and they wanted to laugh. They wanted to see the ironic side of things. I think humor, if you wanted to look at it in a pointy-headed philosophical way, humor is the rational or human response to living in a world we weren't made for. We weren't made to live without the preternatural gifts, the gifts God gave us before Adam's fall. We weren't meant to die this way. We weren't meant to be subject to physical injury. We weren't meant to be ignorant or make gross errors. We weren't meant to be out of direct communion with God. All those things were part of our original creation, the intent for human nature. And those are all out of joint because of the fall. And so we're kind of like penguins walking on land or dogs trying to swim. We're not in the element we were made for. And I think that's what makes humor essential, because other implications of our mismatch are tragedies. People dying untimely deaths, wickedness and persecution being imposed on people, on the innocent and the vulnerable. Those are part of the fall too, but so is humor. So is the absurd. The absurd can be tragic, or the absurd can be comic, and sometimes it's both. I wrote a piece on January 7th reflecting on what we call the Reichstag riot, when Trump supporters dangerously took selfies in the Capitol. And the whole left and the establishment right were trying to make it out as if the Reichstag had burned and we needed to suspend the Constitution. And I wrote a piece for the stream called "The Republic Has No Clothes," learning from the march on the Capitol, or storming the Capitol. And I wrote that this was like one of those Greek festivals. You know that all the Greek tragedies were designed to be performed alongside comedies. They would show a tragedy and then a comedy. And they were both part of the feast of Dionysius, the god of wine, the god of poetic madness and inspiration, but also of frenetic destruction. So I pointed out, yes, it was sad that Ashley Babbitt was shot down by the Capitol Police. That's tragic and horrible and ought to be remembered. But that QAnon guy with the Viking helmet sitting in Nancy Pelosi's chair, that was precious. That was priceless. That was comedy gold. And it perfectly represented what having a stolen election means. It means that democracy becomes kind of a joke.
I want to go back to this too. First, I wanted to say I've enjoyed the conversations you and Eric have had about Yale.
Oh,
You just had a 2-part one that was really interesting.
I got to interview him for a change. That was for the stream. Yeah,
that was cool. And there were funny parts in that too. And I hadn't really thought, I have never visited Yale University. I don't know much about it, but just hearing your recollections and Eric's about it, I actually was influenced somewhat by Yale, actually kind of profoundly. Now, I started Cal, I wore my hat in honor today. So in 1990, and that was the year that Camille Paglia's book, Sexual Persona.
Oh, yeah, she was great.
Which had a huge impact on me. And she was a Yale graduate.
Yeah, yeah. She was very influenced by Harold Bloom.
Yeah.
And that book has a lot of truth in it. I mean, it has as much truth as a pagan is likely to find. You know, she considers herself an old-style Mediterranean pagan who believed in male and female, who believed in reason and irrationality and the distinction between them. Yeah. And she's been kind of a curious defender of Western civilization.
You got it.
In a time of chaos.
Yeah, two things in that book. Well, the whole thing was very influential on me, but I mean, she did talk about the biological distinctions between male and female, which are kind of strange to hear now. But then the other part that was not so good is that she viewed especially gay men as these sort of the last heroic romantics, you know, and I bought into that completely. Oh. And she's very, very supportive of pornography as an art form. She sees it as a valid art form.
I'm in favor of target practice at the gun range as a form of art, but the mainstream media just won't accept it.
And then in 1991, the following year, Naomi Wolf's book, The Beauty Myth, came out.
Oh, yeah.
Which
you didn't have to be in a seminar with Naomi Wolf the way I did.
I didn't know that, but she is also a Yale graduate.
I was stuck in an art history class with her. Now, I got to say, Naomi Wolf is doing great work right now, fighting the vaccine passports and the tyranny, the medical tyranny they're trying to impose on us. But back then, she was just an annoying radical feminist. And I'll tell you a couple of funny stories. First of all, I was in an art history, Renaissance history class with her, and we were in the weekly discussion section with the teacher's assistant. The TA barely got a word in edgewise because Naomi would take over the class as if she were teaching it. Once.
Is this when you were undergraduate?
Yeah. I went to Yale from 82 to 86. I graduated in 86.
And then you went to LSU?
I went to do my PhD, my MFA in writing, creative writing, and my PhD in literature. And I dawdled and took 10 years to do that from 86 to 96. Because they gave me a lot of fundings and it beat working. And it was the 90s. It was slacker time. We were Generation X. You know, I had a cheap apartment.
I'm there.
Yeah, so I just read lots of books. Basically making up for the stuff that I hadn't read as an undergrad or hadn't learned in high school. So Yeah, in one seminar I had Naomi Wolf just basically taught the seminar, even though she was a student. Another funny story about Naomi Wolf that I haven't had the chance to share. She was a radical feminist, but she had this big hulking macho boyfriend.
Wow.
And she used to publish this really cloying feminist erotic poetry in the feminist magazine on campus, Aurora. And I had previously written mock lesbian love poems and tried to get them published in the Yale Humor magazine, making fun of Aurora. But Eric Metaxas and his staff, while they said they wanted it to publish it and give it an award, they said we would get chopped up with axes by the feminists. So they didn't publish it. But she knew I wrote satirical feminist poetry. Somebody did satires of Naomi's feminist poetry and posted it all around campus. And her big hulking boyfriend confronted me in the library about this. And he was clearly looked like he was going to beat somebody up over it. And I thought that was touching. A man chivalrously standing up for his girlfriend's feminist poetry. I said, no, I'm sorry. If I'd written that stuff that good, I would have signed it. I mean, those things are hilarious. I'm glad they did them, but I'm sorry, I can't take credit for them. And then he looked like he wanted to hit me even harder, but he realized that there was no basis for it, so he sort of stormed away.
Wow.
But I'm glad to see Naomi is on the side of the angels in at least a few issues nowadays. God bless her. You know what happened to Naomi? She divorced the nerdy guy, the leftist she'd been married to for years. She's now married to, I think, an ex-New York cop with an Irish last name. So I think she finally found a real man, a working class guy, and she realized, wait, men aren't terrible. Maybe America's not terrible. I kind of want to be free. I don't know. God bless Naomi. Let's keep praying for her. She's come a long way.
I hadn't thought of her since I was in college, and then I saw her. She's been so vocal about COVID-19.
Yeah, no, and what she's doing now is terrific, and all the left is turning on her viciously. We ought to rally around her because we need converts. We need people to see sense.
God bless her. Yeah. And it's interesting because my major at Cal was art history. And I mean, her book, I can't blame her. Her book was very influential, but the strain of thought that she explored, which was gender, was already around. And I'm looking back, so many of my courses were focused on gender. I remember specifically that, like, the female medieval saints, they weren't suffering, they weren't fasting, they weren't in ecstasy. They were all, they all had anorexia nervosa.
Well, I tell you, I think St. Rita might have, and Catherine Siena might have. When I read those stories, to me, I have to say, I've written humorous books on the saints. Reading traditional saints' lives often strike me as cautionary tales. Like, okay, this is way over the top. Don't do this.
Yeah, I think there's always a mix of the psychological and the spiritual in everything. In art, it was very sad because at that time they seemed to reduce everything to points of gender, and then things tend to lose beauty at that point.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, sexuality. I prefer using the term sexuality because gender just means endings in Romance languages. Sexuality, the fact that we are a dimorphous mammalian species, it's one of the basic realities of life. And the fact that this monstrous transgender movement is trying to deny that, basically because of 6 white male billionaires who caught a case of autogynephilia. In other words, they were watching lesbian porn on the internet so much, they decided they wanted to be lesbians. There are like 6 white male billionaires funding the whole transgender movement, pushing these insanely radical ideas on all our whole culture, affecting our religious freedom, our personal freedom, and getting lots of confused teenagers to maim themselves and sterilize themselves and take dangerous hormones just to get over adolescent confusions that I think 90% or more of teens who have gender dysphoria, they just recover spontaneously if you don't do anything at all.
It's complicated because I remember when I was in the gay community, the transgender experience wasn't mine, but I always found it kind of curious that guys that I did know that that transitioned to women, oftentimes if they were partnered with a woman before transitioning, sometimes they were still partnered with her after, or with another female, which I always thought was
Right.
curious.
Some people have a mental illness of gender dysphoria, and some people it's basically a sexual perversion called autogynephilia, and it arises from different sources. From what I've read, a lot of young lesbian women are being convinced that they have to transition into being boys. A lot of autistic girls on the spectrum are being told that's the source of your problem. It really reminds me of the lobotomy craze in the 40s and 50s, when they decided that the cure for schizophrenia was cutting the frontal lobe. Whenever you tell people to carve up the hardware to fix a software problem, I think you're in a very dangerous territory.
Yeah, I agree. One last thing about the 90s when I was at Cal, and about this related to Yale. One of the most memorable moments I have of being at Berkeley was there was I forget what it's called. I think it was called the Commons, and there was like a pub, and there was a place where like they sell the memorabilia for the college, but then there was also like a big bookstore. And I remember that it must have been 90 or 91, right after Naomi Wolf's book came out. But they had a big display of Camille Paglia's Sexual Persona. And then right next to it, they had like a display of Naomi Wolf's The Beauty Myth right together. It was so interesting. And thinking back now, I'm like, and that was like the beginning of PC culture.
Yeah.
But thinking back now, I was like, gosh, was that a golden age of free expression?
Yeah.
Compared to now, because there you had those two books were pretty much diametrically opposed to each other, right next to each other. And then now
probably both of them will be banned. The only thing you're allowed to read is White Fragility, and maybe whatever Ta-Nehisi Coates' book is, Between the World and I. I mean, what's going on?
So John, it wasn't that when we were in college. I mean, when I was there at the time, I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is so repressive. But now I'm thinking it wasn't that bad.
No, in fact, as to make a free speech point, I insisted, and I managed to get the Yale Political Union to invite 2 consuls general from the Republic of South Africa when it was still apartheid. And we got them speak on campus and make their case. And that we did not allow the event to be disrupted or shouted down. We were making a free speech point, and we were able to. Try doing that at Yale now.
Anywhere. Okay, I want to go back to the humor topic a little bit. Well, you already mentioned this. Humor is often a mix of comedy and tragedy, and I was thinking about this too. It seems like a lot of the great comedians were Jewish, and I mean, of course, the Jewish people have had a long history of
and that's why a lot of the great jokes are Polish, because because Poland was not particularly nice to the Jews. There were historical reasons for that. The Russians used the Jews as tax collectors among the Polish people, and helped make the Jews into scapegoats for them. But a lot of Jews who came here from Poland still had some bitter memories of the people back in Poland, and that's why the Polish joke became so popular for so many decades. So don't tick off the people who produce the comedians, because you're going to pay a very serious price for that.
I didn't realize that. And then some of the comedians I was thinking of, like that were Jewish, Joan Rivers, Rodney Dangerfield, Roseanne Barr. A lot of their humor, a lot of times, is very self-deprecating.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of, this is a way that I think some people deal with trauma and or abuse. I remember as a kid, I had a friend. He kind of reminds me of you. I didn't have a big circle of male friends. I actually had very few. I had just a handful, and we were all kind of rejects for different reasons. And this one friend that I had and he was probably teased as much as me, probably not quite as viciously, but he had a different way of dealing with it, which was through humor, which is often very self-deprecating, and where I didn't have that gift or that aptitude.
I
at
was
all.
really good at other deprecating. Don Rickles was my role model as a kid. And some of the bigger hulking guys would taunt and try to bully me. And I just had a very fierce wit that would knock the legs out from under them. And then they would gather outside the school planning to beat the tar out of me for what I had done to them during the school. But I found multiple exits out of the school. There were just too many ways to escape from the school for them to have enough posses at every exit to catch me and beat me up after school. So this was my response to a difficult adolescent period. Savagery and then escape.
And then would they kind of leave you alone a little bit?
They
or did it keep up?
They would periodically, it would bubble up, and one of them would get kind of violent. But these were blue collar white kids whose dads owned homes, and they knew they had something to lose. So I'll give you an example. Once I wrote we were studying T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland in English class. I was in the advanced English class, and I wrote my own pastiche, terrible, 16-year-old poetry. And I was bringing it in to show the English teacher. I wasn't showing anybody else. But one of the leaders of the cool kids, they call themselves the burnouts or the dirtbags. That was their term for themselves. Grabbed it and said, "What is this, a poem? Zmirak wrote a poem." Marched out to the designated smoking yard, because of course my high school had a smoking yard, and set it on fire. I went over and grabbed the vice principal and reported it. I had no fear, no shame about snitching. That's very important. Teach your kids, snitch all day long. Rat them out, otherwise the bullies win. So I marched the vice principal over there, and he grabbed the two ringleaders by the scruff of the neck and was about to drag them to the principal's office. And the bigger guy said, "We're going to kill you, Zmirak, you're crazy." And I said, "Well, I don't think you're actually going to literally kill me. You might beat me up. I'll get you kicked out of high school. You'll work at McDonald's at the minimum wage for the rest of your miserable life. I'll forget you ever existed. Seems like a fair deal." And he looked at me and said, "You're an asshole, Zmirak." I said, "I know. Have a nice day." And he never messed with me again.
Wow. Now, see, I think especially for boys, I think those I don't know if it's traumatic for you, but that kind of experiences for me when I was a kid was traumatic. Is that they'll either build you up and make you stronger, or they'll break you. I mean, like Ben Shapiro's another one. He did a talk that was really interesting. It was nothing to do with bullying, but he mentioned that as a kid he was bullied pretty severely, and I mean he's overcome it. But,
yeah, he has. Whereas Rod Dreher still seems wounded by it and still writes about it as if it happened yesterday.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I won't mock him. I can relate to that, because to some people it breaks you. And I have to say, and it's not so much that original bullying or teasing that is so important at the memory, but it's the cascade effect that it had. Because I mean, especially for me, and I can't speak for anybody else, but for me, that teasing and bullying, it kind of set me up for a lot of things that happened. I was very susceptible to abuse, especially by men, because I was really longing for that, because I never experienced much companionship or camaraderie.
I was really blessed that I had one very good, healthy male friendship with a guy named Anthony.
Oh,
we're best friends since second grade, and we're still best friends now. We do a Skype every week. Since second grade to now, we've maintained it. And he was kind of athletic and popular and charismatic. And, he played a rock guitar in high school in the 80s, and kind of a rebel. And, he had all that street cred, but he helped me gain a little street cred while I helped him with his homework, and I corrected his grammar, and I kind of pedantically taught him about Catholicism, what we weren't learning in the school. His mother wanted him to hang around with me instead of the other street toughs. And my mother didn't want me to hang around with him because he was a little too much of an actual boy, you know, and I defied my mother and hung out with him. And he was a very good influence on me. Thank God he wasn't some molester with an agenda. And I know a lot of young men who were in my situation made the wrong kind of male friendships, and it marked them for life.
Yeah, me, John. But yeah.
I think it's a very common predatory pattern.
Yeah, it happens more than people I think would like to think. But anyway, the other thing is that the other thing I think that you and Ben Shapiro have in common is you both had good fathers. And my first podcast with you was mainly about your dad, and you had a good dad. You had a good relationship with him.
Yeah.
And that can pull boys that are having a difficult time at school. I think that can pull them out of it if dad is supportive. Yeah. If he's not around, it's not good.
Yeah, I'm glad he had a union job, so he only worked 8 hours, and
he was a mailman.
Yeah, he was, and this is before mail carts or mail trucks, so he carried it on his back. He was like a small horse. Once he gave a woman the Heimlich maneuver, saved her life, and broke 2 of her ribs.
Oh,
he could have kicked my butt right up to his deathbed.
Oh gosh!
I brought you into this world, and I could take you out.
Oh, God bless it. A lot, I have to say, in some of your interviews, and maybe you don't know this, but I picked it up. And a lot of your writing, a lot of your humor about your own childhood has to do with your mother.
Yeah, she was a really interesting case. Do you remember the Democratic Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro?
Oh, very well.
Yeah, she was our Congresswoman. And my mother was kind of like a right-wing version of Geraldine Ferraro in personality. She even looked like her. And once Geraldine Ferraro came, she had just been made our congressman, and she came to our church to schmooze with the priest and promise all the old people more Social Security. And she was a liberal Democrat, of course, pro-abortion, of course. And
she would be a moderate now.
Yeah. But she was like a Nancy Pelosi type, you know.
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi was more moderate back then. So because it's a blue collar white district, she knew to sort of tailor her rhetoric to suit the audience. So she was supposed to speak at the parish, and the Democrat congresswoman's coming. They love Democrats. The Irish Catholics love the Democrats.
The Italians, yeah.
Some of the Italians became Republicans.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, but the Irish were all Democrats. It was like being Catholic. So the Ferrara comes to speak, and at some point I send my mother there as a plant, and I prep her. And at some point someone sort of timidly asks about her position on abortion. And Ferrara says, well, as a Catholic, I am personally opposed to abortion. But I believe in a woman's choice. I mean, what if your daughter were raped by a mugger? And of course, the audience were replacing the first two letters of mugger, the MU with NI. You know, there's a little bit of racial panic underlying that. What if your daughter were raped by a mugger? Oh. And the audience sort of squirms, and the priest wants to change the subject.
Oh.
My mother stands up, doesn't even ask a question, says, first of all, I want to know what you're doing up there, saying you're a good Catholic and saying you're for abortion, doesn't pause. Then I want to know what you priests and nuns are up there doing, peddling this garbage. And I want to know all you people here are standing here grinning like idiots. I don't know about you, but I'm walking out. So no question, and walks out. Huge applause. The whole event degenerates into chaos. Mission accomplished. So my mother was capable of doing that. She was also capable of hogging the phone for 12 hours and not letting me call my friend. And when I want to call my friend, I have to go out in the snow to use the phone booth down the block. And she had probably a lot of my personality and intelligence, but was not well educated. She had dropped out of high school. She never forgave the Chinese for Pearl Harbor, wouldn't let us go to Chinatown because of Pearl Harbor, and you couldn't convince her that there was any difference between the Chinese and the Japanese who were at war at the time. She didn't want me going as a 10-year-old into stores run by Koreans because I might be kidnapped by the Moonies and brainwashed. So, I mean, I have a lot of material there. So you know, that's comedy gold. You're not going to leave that on the table.
I just want to remind you a few of the favorite ones that I found. Now, this is old. This was 2004.
Gosh, you know my work better than I do.
You wrote a review for the movie Kinsey.
Oh, yeah.
And you wrote, when I was 12, I asked my parents where babies came from, and they claimed not to know. Oh.
And I kind of believe them. They always had separate rooms. So
I'm sorry. And then in 2011, you did an interview with Crisis, and it was funny because you talked about your mother's attitude towards garlic, and it was.
I can tell that story. Yeah, you'll appreciate this because it involves Italians.
I love garlic.
Yeah, well, growing up, we had like in the spice cabinet a 20-year-old bottle of garlic powder that we never used for anything. My mother, being an Irish American, thought food was something that came in a can or a box. The most elaborate dish she ever made was canned tuna over toast in a kind of flour milk sauce with canned peas. That was like Easter dinner. So I went to my friend Anthony's house, and I had eaten some of his mother's wonderful cooking. His parents came to America from Italy, never learned English, saved their money, bought a house. My mother blew all our money on bingo and poker at the church, so we were still living in a tenement. But anyway, I went over to their house, which they owned, and had some chicken with garlic or something. Okay. I came back, my mother said, somehow over the cigarette smoke, she could smell it. She said, "What is that coming out of your skin? It smells like a guinea house." And I said, "Mom, that's something called a seasoning. And the Italians use it for a quality they call flavor. You might want to look into it." Well,
you were a smart mouth.
Oh, I was a total smart mouth. We'll get back to that. Put a pin in that. So for April Fools, when I would always do crazy pranks on her, I put garlic powder, so that 20-year-old worn out garlic powder, into her cough medicine, which she took every day because she smoked 2.5 packs a day. She tasted it and said, "What did you put in my food?" I said, "Garlic." And she started panicking that she was going to get a high blood pressure and a stroke. She called the Poison Control Bureau and told them what happened. He said, ma'am, are you Irish?" "Yeah, why?" "Okay, garlic is not a toxin. It is a food substance. It cannot harm you. I suggest you just lie down in the dark for a few hours and the taste will go away."
Oh.
So that's what she did.
Oh, dear.
All right, back to the smart mouth thing. How old are you? I was born in December, so I was always younger than the other kids. So I think I was 8 years old when I finished second grade. I remember the nun in the pantsuit calling me out at the end of second grade. See, when I was in Catholic school, they just started these SRA cards where they didn't teach. They just gave you these cards to do on your own all day long. You were supposed to just do your own work and come to them with questions, so they would just sit at the head of the room. So anyway, I found these stupid and refused to do them. I just boycotted all the work because I thought it was dumb. It was dull. I would read on my own, or I would pester people, write love poems to the girls. I was annoying. I was a handful, and I got lots of sugar in my diet, so I was bouncing off the walls. I mean, nowadays I would be on so much Ritalin, I would just be in the corner. But back then I was just bouncing off the walls like a beagle, which is why I love that breed of dog. Anyway, at the end of the year, the nun brings me out, in her pantsuit, rust-colored 70s pantsuit, says, "Young man, we're finishing the second grade. I just need to inform you, you have not done a lick of your assigned schoolwork all year, none of it. And by rights, we should not allow you to finish the second grade. The only reason we're promoting you is because of how high you scored on all those standardized tests. because I was always in the 99th percentile of the standardized test they administered to second graders. She said, but rightly, you should be forced to repeat the second grade. What do you think of that, young man? And I thought for a second, and I said, but then you just have me for another year. And I don't think either of us wants that. Yeah. And then she looked at me and she taught me a new word, incorrigible.
You were quick for that age. I would have been mortified. I wouldn't have been able to speak.
I just did the calculation. You really want to do this? You really want another year of me?
So they promoted you.
Oh yeah. They should have skipped me. It would have been in their interest, but they had a policy against it.
Here, this is another one this is from 2019. This is from the stream. You wrote a bribe college admissions officers ? My parents wouldn't pay for driver's ed. And you talked about how you had to drag your mother to your Yale graduation.
Yeah, when it was time for driver's ed, they said, "What are you going to need that for? Just take the subway." I didn't learn to drive till I was 36 years old, and that meant like 6 years in Baton Rouge cadging rides from people. And I couldn't drive over a bridge, and neither of my sisters could ever drive over a bridge. I would take ferries. I would drive my car out of the way to take a ferry over the Mississippi River. Why? Because every time my father drove my mother on the few occasions she left Queens over the 59th Street Bridge, she would look down at the water, have a panic attack, and start saying the act of contrition. So when you're 4 and 5 years old and you see this, you think you could pretty well fall off this bridge and die. So yeah, seriously, neither of my sisters could drive over a bridge. And I, for about a year, when I finally started driving, was using the Mississippi River ferry. And then they eliminated the last ferry, so I forced myself to drive over the bridge. I had to pull over to the side of the road and celebrate, do a little victory dance, because I had driven over a bridge.
I want to come back to that. One last thing. This is just from the interview you did with Eric Metaxas.
Okay.
It's funny the things I pick up on. This might have been a throwaway line for you.
Yeah.
Although Eric kind of commented on it too. You wrote, "My mother would kick me out the door with a plastic gun and say, go find some kid to play with."
Yeah, that was the right thing to do.
And Eric goes, "You're kidding. You're not joking." And then you go buy some fireworks in Chinatown, set them off. I mean, that was growing up.
Yeah, in my neighborhood, we bought tons of illegal fireworks from Chinatown, and the cops didn't hassle us. In a story in the 70s, if the cops caught you with pot, they would just take it and smoke it themselves.
John, if my mother had said, pushed me out of the house with a plastic gun and said, "Go find a boy to play with," I would have hidden under the porch. So it's different.
Yeah.
There's a mixture of the tragic and the comic in a lot of your memories.
Well, I think I had some tragic circumstances. I had some very painful experiences, but I inherited from my mother being a stubborn Irish mule who kicks back. I think that's genetic.
With a different child and with a different temperament, I think some of your upbringing would have been traumatic for people.
It was traumatic, some of it, but again, I think there's just a native toughness that I just inherited that,
And you're a New Yorker.
Yeah, I'm a New Yorker. So, I mean, I don't know if you've ever done this. Have you ever been confronted by someone trying to rob you on the street and acted so crazy and violent that they ran off down the street to get away from you? I did that.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Kill one of you people! Let's do it! Come on! And he ran off down the street. Okay. Then I panicked. But when I feel the instinct of fear, it immediately makes me enormously, violently angry, instantly. And then later I register the fear. But if someone tries to threaten me, the fear immediately transforms into just titanic rage, which I think has gotten me through life pretty well.
Yeah, I think you're a fighter too. And I think part of that was instilled within you with a kid. And I noticed that a lot of the guys that I still follow, but I'm not on social media. but I notice a lot of the guys that have been able to stick it out in the Catholic Church, especially recently, are fighters. I think they're tough guys.
Well, you have to be.
And
I
I
mean,
don't mean that in terms of like a boxer or a bruiser,
no.
but I think you have a certain thick skin that I don't have.
Oh yeah,
And
I feel stuff. I am actually sensitive, but the way I've dealt with that is by counterpunching.
and humor, I
Yeah,
think.
usually counterpunching humorously.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's a
You know,
sarcastic
like
kind.
this kind of thuggish kid was making fun of my last name in high school. His name was Ed, so I invented the nickname for him, Special Ed.
Oh God.
You know, well, right there you go. Right, don't mess with Zmirak. It will haunt you. It will haunt your nightmares. Hey, Special Ed, I would say in front of like 30 people, and it caught on.
I want to read you something because I'm curious to what your opinion of this. This is from Jordan Peterson.
Right. Who I
And
need to read. I've not sat down to read him yet. I need to.
I've read both of his. Well, he's had other books, but I've read them, and then but I've listened to him a lot. This was something that he just said recently, this year, about a month ago, not even a month ago, March 15th, 2021. He was talking to Brett Weinstein, who I really like. He said one of the things that torments me constantly is, and I think it's really hurt me to discover this, is I had no idea how deep the desperation was for people who lack encouragement. To see the depth of hunger that people had for an encouraging word was unbelievably tragic. It, it I mean, did you have a lot of encouragement? I always kind of wondered. It seemed like you were kind of a self-propelled kid. I mean,
Well,
you were the first to go to college.
yeah.
Your mother wasn't that thrilled, God bless her, to go to your graduation. Your dad was very supportive.
Yeah, my dad would bring me home books to read, which he had stolen from the dead letter office. He later got in trouble for that. But he would bring me books, and he was kind of proud about my academic accomplishments. And my mother always said, "You got book learning, but you got no common sense." And I would say, "And all of your senses, mother, are so inexpressibly common," which went right over her head, but it felt good to say it. It was kind of like being Niles Crane trapped on the set of That '70s Show. But I got encouraged, and I got encouragement, but also I watched a lot of PBS. I watched a lot of educational TV. I was watching Masterpiece Theater. I was reading everything I could get my hands on, as long as it wasn't assigned in school. But you know, it's funny what you said that my best friend Anthony to this day said, "You know what I found appealing about you as a kid? You were raising yourself. You knew your parents didn't have a handle on things, and you knew what you wanted to do and to be, and you just took charge of it, and you did it regardless of everybody in the neighborhood, the school, or your parents. You just sort of did it, and you could kind of raised yourself." I had never thought of that before you pointed it out.
I did think of you because I was listening to that interview in a different context. I did think of you because you were kind of an odd duck, it seems, in your family. Your dad was a good man, but he was blue collar.
Right.
You were more intellectual. It seems like your mother wasn't real supportive.
No, it was
So,
like, imagine Fraser Crane with two Martins and no Niles.
it would be difficult, yeah.
No, I mean, it was fun. At one point, I thought I might be some sort of genetic leap off over the rest of the human race, because I'd never met very many smart people. I thought at one point I was like 11. It's like, can I breed with these people? Another time I thought maybe I was the Antichrist. Oh, this is this funny story that I told once. I had seen the Omen movies and read books about it. And I was experiencing, I was coming of age sexually and feeling guilty about it, and guilty about impure thoughts. And I decided that the proof that I was not the Antichrist would be if I could get through my confirmation ceremony without having any impure thoughts, even though there were tons of girls there with us. And I managed it. And it was a great relief to me that I was not, in fact, the Antichrist. So my confirmation meant more to me than I think most of the people in my school.
I kind of want to go full circle here. I'm trying to circle back. Oh, I'm not supposed to use that term. But yeah, I'm sorry. But this discussion into a bigger picture, it seems like nowadays I've never seen such humorless generations.
Oh yeah.
Right now, it was one of the reasons especially Twitter. Twitter, it seems like it's a form that would really lend itself well to humor, but it
Oh
seems
yeah.
like it seems to cater to a lot of just mean, nasty nastiness. And
Well, they're kicking those of us who are funny off of Twitter, aren't they?
it wasn't that hard to close my account because yeah, of course you were gone and you were funny,
I,
and yeah, just there wasn't a lot of reasons to hang around.
I th-
I think of if any generation needs humor right now, I think it's the current one
oh yeah.
because
Saturday Night Live isn't funny anymore. You don't have to be funny. You just have to do a little political virtue dance, and then people laugh out of a sense of obligation. I mean, there's nothing
yeah,
less funny than Alec Baldwin doing Donald Trump. It's
and
nothing like Chevy
no,
Chase doing Gerald Ford. That was funny. It was when what's behind a satire isn't correction, even if it's not gentle, even savage correction. When it's just actual hatred, it's usually not very funny. So Charlie Chaplin playing Hitler was funny because he didn't fantasize about rounding up all the Nazis and gassing them, you know. But when you actually hate the target of your satire, you're not going to be funny. You're not really going to be funny because you're it's like you're hunting another species. There's no common human ground there, and you're likely to overshoot the mark and just be nasty and disturbing and unsettling. And you get things like Kathy Griffin holding up Trump's severed head. I mean, that's not funny. It's not good rhetoric. It's unsettling. It blew back on her, thankfully. Um, I think the woke phenomenon, which I think is very important for people to understand, it is a great awakening without Jesus. It is a religious awakening. It is a cry for morality and meaning and redemption among people who have ruled all those things out because they've accepted Darwinian materialism as the complete explanation of human existence. So, on the one hand, all life is the result of random chemical mutations, then random biological mutations, and then the savage winnowing process of natural selection. But then somehow on top of that, we want to accept the anthropology of the civil rights movement.
yeah.
Oh no, everybody has a right to feel accepted and to feel welcomed, and everybody has a right, not to be misgendered. I don't see chimpanzees being careful not to misgender each other. I don't see gorillas establishing equity and affirmative action. We have a completely schizophrenic society. The way to describe it is we have a society of people who like the tops of buildings. They love things like the top of the Chrysler Building, the top of the Empire State Building, but they're opposed to having the foundations in the ground. They don't want there to be any foundations. They want just the tops of buildings floating in the air. They want equality, tenderness towards the vulnerable, respect for the disadvantaged, but they want to believe that we're all the results of the survival of the fittest. There's no connection between those things. So what I like to do is I like to provoke people with phrases like sometimes as I was leaving a really left-wing coffee shop in New York, apropos of nothing, I would say to my friend, "That's fascist in the negative sense," and just leave.
Oh.
Or that's racist in a bad way. Just like tossing a grenade behind yourself. Because these people don't have any explanations for why racism is bad. Racism is the bad. That is the thing which is bad. So you don't need to explain it. You don't need to look for Christian anthropology and human dignity or any of the reasons racism is bad. You've just sort of made a fetish out of it.
I'm sympathetic to people that fall into these cult-like thought patterns because I mean I did it myself, and I think especially with young people now, I mean the majority of them have been brought up in broken homes,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
without two parents. So I mean, I think they're instinctively looking for something that's structured, that's doctrinal,
Yeah.
that's yeah. So and I mean, I did that as well. I wanted to throw a couple these I thought were surprising. These just came out recently. These studies and these research surveys. So 44% of older millennials, those born between 1981 and 88, report having been diagnosed with at least one chronic health condition.
Wow.
So almost half. They include in order migraine headaches, major depression is number two, asthma, type 2 diabetes, and then hypertension.
Wow.
Yeah. So here's another one. A Pew Research Center um, study shows that 56% of young white liberal women have been diagnosed with a mental illness. That's twice the rate of their conservative counterparts.
Wow. Well, because nobody sins. So if something's wrong, it must be an illness. And if it's not physical, it's psychological. So nobody
This
can
is
repent.
Yeah, this is very. I mean, it doesn't look good. We've got half who have chronic illnesses, and then another half have serious mental illnesses.
Whatever we're doing, it is not working. Have you ever read the work of Jennifer Morse?
No, I haven't.
She runs the Ruth Institute. She has got a great book called The Sexual State. Her thesis is that the sexual revolution was a political revolution in every bit as much as the French or the Russian revolutions. There were utopian goals promoted by eccentric intellectuals that managed to capture institutions and then capture government power and try to forcibly remake the population to match the utopian goals of the revolutionaries. And I think the sexual revolution, looked at that way, was far more radical and far more destructive than even the Russian Revolution.
Yeah, yeah. The part of it, I was curious what you thought about this too. This is me trying to draw lines. I'm trying to understand why there's such high rates of mental illness right now. And I'm somebody that has mental illness, so I'm sympathetic. One of the things that is called catastrophizing. So
Catastrophizing, yeah.
yeah, okay, you know what it is.
Well,
So
I do that. I mean, listen, when something starts to go wrong, my mind immediately does a worst case scenario. It
okay.
instantly follows things to the worst possible outcome. And then I have to figure out how to avoid the worst outcome, and then the second worst, and then the third worst. And eventually I get a handle on it and I figure out that it's manageable.
This is an anxiety disorder associated with GAD, which is general anxiety disorder, PTSD, OCD. I think a lot of people have this. I think we're seeing it on society wide. I mean,
Right.
I'm trying to think of when I mean, because I do it too, but I'm trying to think in terms of a cultural milieu. Where I first saw it is when I went to the gay community back in the late 80s, and there was this theory, or I don't know, hypothesis, I don't know what you call it, where AIDS had been artificially manufactured by the United States government to kill gay people. And
Right.
this was actually something that a lot of people took seriously.
Oh, I remember when they attacked St. Patrick's Cathedral and accused Cardinal O'Connor of being part of this conspiracy.
That was ACT UP, yeah. And I understand why now. I understand back then why people were willing to believe that, because there was such a lack of information. People were dying, people were scared, so they became susceptible to these conspiracy theories. But
Right.
I mean,
Right.
we're seeing that now. People, especially online,
Oh, yeah.
people surrounding COVID, politics. It's very sick. It's not healthy. So
And
I was wondering.
there
I was
also
wondering.
are real conspiracies. So that's the problem, that there are real conspiracies alongside the fake conspiracy theories. I mean, there was a conspiracy to destroy Donald Trump's presidency with false, ludicrous charges of his being a Russian spy or a Russian plant. Never any evidence of it. It was used for years, and they tried to impeach him over it. What about Brett Kavanaugh? Brett Kavanaugh and Mark Judge were supposedly leading a teenage rape gang
Oh yeah.
among the Catholic high schools of the Washington, D.C. area.
People believe this.
Yes, they believed it. And then they said, okay, well, maybe it's not true. Oh, whatever. But they still wanted to stop Brett Kavanaugh. Do you think people really believed the rape charges against Brett Kavanaugh? If they really fundamentally believed them, they would be angry right now that a rapist is on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
But they're not.
Well,
they're not talking about it that way. They obviously never really believed it. They just made themselves believe it because it was politically helpful.
Well, I mean, I think Tara Reade ended the Me Too movement because, I mean, I hate to use this phrase, but as a survivor myself, I was willing to give Christine Blasey Ford and Tara Reade the benefit of the doubt. But when the same people that were rallying for Christine Blasey Ford wouldn't do the same for Tara Reade, I mean, I think that kind of ended it. So.
You mean the woman who was supposedly molested by Biden?
Right. You got to be consistent, and they weren't consistent. So.
Yeah, the same people who willingly made films with Harvey Weinstein for 15 years, knowing what he was up to, knowing what was entailed in working with him. I mean, I like what Rose McGowan has a lot of courage, and she actually is consistent in trying to call out this disgusting system. And we all know about Corey Feldman and how many young people were abused and molested in Hollywood. There's a film called The Open Secret, which is really worth seeing, and it's about how the on-site educators for the child stars, some of them were pedophiles, and they would like trade, and they would they would cover for each other. And of course, the horrendous sex scandal in Catholic institutions, which was never really fixed. The bishops who covered up for the pedophiles were never punished.
Yeah. I just want to. This is a horrible segue. But I wanted to go right back to the issue of humor real quick, because I kept you too long. But if anybody needs humor right now, I think people do. And I mean, like, comedians have been unwilling to appear on college campuses because they're afraid of being canceled or offensive or triggering someone. And when I've seen, there's a film, and I discussed it with my friend Steve on another podcast, Deadpool, which deals with the issue of trauma. But the humor in that film is, for me, the humor itself was traumatizing. It was so sadistic, and it was so violent. It was so ugly.
I refuse to see Deadpool because there was supposedly a pegging scene in it, and I'm not going to witness that. But there's a good comedian out there. Good. He's filthy. He's raunchy, but he is utterly unafraid. His name is Ryan Long. Check out Ryan Long's comedy. He interviews people and makes fun of wokeness in the most hilarious ways. Like he'll go interview woke New Yorkers about pimping. Do we have to respect the pimp community? And he actually gets people to agree. He uses woke arguments. It pushes them to their logical absurdities, and people go along with it. It's really like, should pimps get COVID relief checks because their hoes are out of commission? And people will be like, well, I think that's really worth considering. Isn't the pimping community vulnerable and marginalized and demonized?
I hope so.
I never thought of it that way. No, it's Ryan Long. Check it out. I can't vouch for it from a Catholic perspective. It is filthy, but it is absolutely savage. He is the Jonathan Swift of our era.
Well, one last thing too is that I just want to go back to that issue of catastrophizing real quick, because in the 1970s is really when we saw the birth of, I think, identity politics.
Yeah.
With gender and sexual orientation specifically.
You had Jesse Jackson. You had Harvey Milk.
Yeah.
You had George Wallace on the other side, all at the same time.
Gloria Steinem. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, in the 1970s, you had the advent of the disaster film, like Meteor, Earth, The Swarm. What was it?
I saw them all.
Okay.
I saw Earthquake and Sense-Around, which made the they made the movie theater rumble.
Oh, no.
I went to see horror movies where the gimmick was they gave you a vomit bag to deal with in case the movie was too disgusting.
Oh, was that The Exorcist?
No, I never saw The Exorcist. It was some Vincent Price movie. My sisters took me to see House of Wax and The Conqueror Worm and all those Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe movies at way too young an age.
Yeah. But don't you think it's interesting that now we're having such a strong resurgence of identity politics? And we're really in kind of like a disaster movie right now, especially with COVID.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of catastrophizing with climate change or global warming. It seems like all of these things are reconverging, but in a worse way than in the 70s. And I think it's because of social media too.
That's definitely part of it. We're seeing the worst of paganism and the worst of Christianity hook up and have babies out of wedlock. And those babies are little monsters running around in our midst. So people don't have a sense of ultimate meaning. So that leads you to panic. People don't have a really good reason to love members of other groups. So they indulge in resentment. People don't want to think that they commit sins, so they see themselves as victims. And none of this is even like the healthier paganism of Camille Paglia talking about classical Greece and Rome. We're more like the third century paganism, where you've got priests of Cybele castrating themselves and running around trying to get young boys they can castrate too, and weird pagan mystery rites and Gnostic cults. It really is like the Roman world that the apostles came to evangelize, but unfortunately the church has been utterly infected from top to bottom by that same spirit, so it can't do anything.
Yeah, and John, you could have came out of your boyhood years angry and hurt, but you didn't.
I focused my anger. Okay. I had good guidance. Like I remember when my mother explained Roe v. Wade to me, and it had just happened. And I was like 8 years old, and she said, "Well, you know how a baby lives in his mother's belly?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, now a doctor can go in and kill it if she wants him to." And I said, "That's legal in America?" And she said, "It is now." And then she muttered something about international communism and went off to smoke a cigarette. And I internalized that, and I got mad about stuff like that. I was mad about Roe v. Wade. I was mad about the Equal Rights Amendment. I was mad about international communism. So that made it really fun being a student at Yale. I mean, I knew on some level I wasn't really going to be accepted. I felt like I wasn't going to be accepted by all these rich kids as I saw them. So I think on a certain level I said, you know what? I'm not going to fit in anyway. It might as well be for high-minded reasons. So I would walk around in a Better Dead Than Red t-shirt. I subscribed to Soldier of Fortune. I told everyone my career aspiration was to be a mercenary. I kind of just put up the skull and crossbones and sailed my pirate ship without any concern for what the rest of the Navy was doing.
You're a fighter, and I'm glad, although I couldn't stick around for the fight, that's continued. I'm glad people, especially men like you, are staying in the Catholic Church, because I don't know what the future holds for the
neither do I.
For the institution, for the institutional church, but I think men like you have to at least try to make it accountable, the institutional church.
Well, I want to plug my Bad Catholics books, which
they are
humorous approaches to dealing with all these issues. The Bad Catholics Guide to the Seven Deadly Sins is one I'm very proud of, and the Bad Catholics Guide to the Catechism. These were all written before Pope Francis, when things were still funny. Things aren't really that funny right now, when we have a pope who said his favorite novel was the novel of the Antichrist, Lord of the World. Ew. But he seems to have mistaken who the hero of the book is, because Pope Francis's actions with all these globalists and with all these abortionists and population controllers, he is acting like the Antichrist figure in that novel. So I wonder if when he announced that that was his favorite novel, was he just trolling us? But I do find him a ludicrous figure. I do think Pope Francis is a genuinely ridiculous man. He is a garden variety atheist with an IQ of maybe 90 who couldn't find any other career where he could succeed except the church and the Jesuits, which were scraping the bottom of the barrel for vocations. And, you know, the Catholic priesthood in the mainstream institution, the priesthood, especially being a bishop, seems to be where the least talented members of ambitious Irish families go, so that if they don't have the talent to be choreographers on Broadway or the brains to work for the Democratic National Committee, they will still end up living in a palace like the Disney princess they always secretly knew that they were.
The Jesuits. Your voice to before I let you go, your voice is missing in Catholic social media. One of the reasons I had to get off, it's not a fun place to be.
No, it's not.
It isn't. People are, and I understand why people in that space are angry. I mean, just for the reasons you gave, because of what's going on in Rome, and for other reasons. But for anybody that's struggling with Catholicism or their faith,
it's so repulsive. It's so repulsive.
Or past trauma or past abuse within the church, there's really not a place there for you to find any sort of support.
The way I stay Catholic is an hour a week. I go to mass, and I give them some money in the collection, and I defend the tenets of the faith. But I don't associate with these people anymore. My friends are like mostly evangelicals now. They're just a lot nicer.
Catholics have really circled the wagon, and it's like, boom. It's like, you know, get on the team or get out.
And my response to that is kiss my black Irish ass. Joe, let me sign out on that high note. God bless.
God bless you too, John.